This is Avi Walerius from IBM Security Systems Guardium Support. In this video I'm going to discuss preventing and reacting to Guardium internal database full issues. Filling up the internal database is one of the most common problems for customers to have, and it can be quite disruptive. So the first thing I'll say on this is that the problem is preventable. A well-administered Guardium appliance should never become full. So there's going to be a lot of links for this video in the description below, and the first one I'll tell you about now is the Administrator Responsibilities Guide. You can follow the instructions in that guide to help guide you on how to administer the environment. In this video, we're going to look at actions you can take now to prevent the internal database filling up, troubleshooting if you do see it filling up, and actions you can do to reduce the space used if it's already quite full. So, prevention. What can you do right now to prevent your internal database filling up in the future? First thing, quite obvious thing, is make sure your appliances meet the minimum system requirements for disk space. So the minimum is 300 gigabytes. There's a link in the video description for the exact system requirements for all the different versions as well. If you don't have the minimum disk space, that's going to leave less space for the internal database, and therefore it's going to fill up much quicker. If your appliances are under specification, you should have a plan to upgrade them. If you're not sure what your disk space is, you can check in any must gather from File Server. So I've come here to the File Server page, you go to SQL Guard Logs, GIM sniff guard logs, must gather, and I've already run a must gather before in the system output.txt file. We've got a lot of information here, but if you scroll down you can see the output of the df command, and you can see how much space is available on the system. So now coming back to the GUI, the second thing you can check right now is your purge period. If you go to Manage, Data Management, either Data Archive or Data Export, you could have the purge set in either or both of those. You can check here the purge data older than days. So the bigger that number is, the more data is going to be kept on the appliance. A lot of times this can be set by business reasons or set by some external factor, but if this number is very large and you haven't considered why the number is so large, then that's something you should at least consider. So you should try to keep as little data as possible on the appliances within your business requirements. For example, you might want to archive the data, or if you're looking at a collector, you might want to send it all to an aggregator. I can't tell you exactly what to set your purge days to, but you need to have some kind of good justification for what it is, and you need to consider why it's the size that it is. Another important thing to note on this page, and we'll come back to this later, is the allow purge without exporting or archiving. If you have this selected, it means that the data will be purged even if it has not been archived or exported. That could cause a problem for you if there's some issues and your data is purged before it's been archived. On the other hand, if it's not selected, that means that the data will never be purged unless it has been exported or archived. If you come to a case where your appliance is filling up with data, it could be because the data is not being purged because it was not archived in the past. Maybe there was an archive problem previously that you didn't realize. So the next thing you can check to prevent this issue is whether the latest GPU patch is installed on your appliance. GPUs are released for every version, and they're containing all the fixes that have been released in the time period since the last GPU. A lot of the time that contains issues around the purge or around aggregation that could help prevent problems with dbfull in the future. You can check out in the CLI using the command show system patch installed. Here I'm on a new build version 10 appliance with no patches. In version 10 there's the alarm bell mechanism on the GUI, so that will show you with the red icon which patches should be installed on the appliance to keep up to date. You can then go to Fix Central and download them. For version 9, there's a tech note in the video description that gives you the release notes and all the latest GPUs, or you can always look on Fix Central to see what are the latest patches that have been released. Now the next thing you can check on the CLI to prevent these issues is the command show auto stop services. Now this should always be set to on. What this does is, when it's on, when the database gets to 90% full, the sniffer on a collector is automatically going to stop, and that is going to prevent it getting to 100% full when it becomes much more difficult to deal with. So double check that, it should be on. If it's off, you should set it to on. and you can set it to on with store auto stop services. Now coming back to the GUI, the next thing you can check is your policy. If you go to Setup, Tools and Views, Policy Installation, you can see the installed policy that you have. The policy is one of the biggest factors in how much data is coming into the appliance, and you need to consider closely how it's defined, and in particular there's a few things that you should try and minimize and try and maximize in terms of filling up the database. So the things that you want to try and minimize is using log fill details actions and alerting actions, especially alert per match. So we'll see more about the consequences of those later, but in general those kind of actions are causing the database to become much more full than the typical logging actions. So in general, again, I can't tell you how to define your policy, but if it's not needed for business reasons, it's better to not use those kind of actions. So you can see here I actually have a very bad policy defined. I've got a log fill details and alert per match on all traffic policy, and we'll see later how that's going to affect what data is going into the database. So that's what we want to minimize. What you want to maximize is ignore STAP session actions, because that is the most effective way to ignore the traffic coming into your appliance. So again, with the policy, it really goes case by case. In every environment, certain things are required, certain things are not required, but the advice I can give now is that if you haven't considered closely the impact of your policy on how much data is being logged into your appliance, then that's something you can do right now to possibly prevent database filling up in the future. You need to consider, am I using log fill details too much in my policy? Am I alerting too much on things I don't really need to alert on? And am I ignoring the traffic that I don't need to see? The final thing you can do right now, but possibly most important thing, is to set up alerts so that you're notified when the database usage goes above a certain threshold, so you can react to it before it's too late to take any significant action. In the video description there's a link to a tech note that has some predefined alerts that you can import into your appliance. So I've done that here. You go to Protect, Database Intrusion Protection, Alert Builder, and if you import these alerts you'll have this here: My Collector, MySQL Disk Usage. There's one for aggregators, there's one for central managers as well. So let's look at this one for now. You can see here, alert when the database disk usage goes above 60%, and it gives you a link to the tech note that's in the description as well. So when you immediately import this alert, the run frequency is every 24 hours. You can change that if you want. If you want to be more granular than that, you might want to change it, say, to every 2 hours. You can change the notification frequency to every 2 hours as well. It's based on this query, collector MySQL disk usage. We'll have a look at that in a minute. When you first import it as well, you need to add a receiver. So let's just add a syslog receiver. You might want to add a mail as well. So there we go, now it's more configured to our environment. Now if we take a look at this query, you can see that it's based on sniffer buffer usage, and all it is just the MySQL disk usage column, and then when the value is above 60. So this is going to send you an alert when the database disk usage goes above 60%, and you can configure the time it runs, who it sends to, and by editing that query you can change the threshold as well. Typically we say in support that you want to keep your database below 50% full, but it does depend on factors specific to each environment. For example, say your database is 50% full with a purge period of 3 days. If you have a problem where the purge stops working, the database is going to fill up pretty quickly. But if you compare that to an example where the database is 50% full with 30 days of data, the amount of data per day is much less, so if you have a problem you have much more time to react before it fills up. So what you want to aim for is a level where you're able to deal with both the natural spikes of data coming in and be able to react in time if there's a problem with the purge, for example, before the appliance fills up. So that might be a little bit above 50, it might be below 50, but it's different in each case. If you're just starting out or you're really not sure what to keep it on, being below 50% is a really good place to aim for. Another point on this, if you look in the Administrator Responsibilities Guide, it outlines a few more alerts that you should configure. One of these is the aggregation errors alert, which I won't go into in this video, but that's linked in to database filling up. If your purge is failing, you have aggregation errors, that could be a reason that the database fills up, and that's something you also want to alert on. So that's 6 things you can do right now as soon as you finish watching this video to hopefully prevent your database becoming full in the future. Now we're going to move on to what do you do if your database is starting to fill up. So let's say you've set up your alert to alert you when the database is 60% full, and now you've gotten that alert. So you're thinking, maybe there's a problem here, maybe something's happening, I need to check up, do some troubleshooting to make sure I prevent the database becoming more full. So the first simple thing to check in the CLI is how full the database actually is right now. So you might have got your alert some time ago, and you just want to double check how full it is now. Support show db status used %, just to confirm that. Now the next important command is to see the top tables of the appliance. Support show db top tables all. Now this is a really important command because what it shows you is how the data is spread out inside the internal database, which tables contain the most data. So for example, if you remember, we have on this appliance a policy installed that does alert per match on everything and log full details on everything. And so I can see the top tables here: GDM policy violations log, that logs alerts in the policy, message text and message, that's associated with sending the alerts, and GDM construct text, that's where the log full details information goes. So you can see based on these tables which policy actions are causing the database to become full, and you can take certain actions to reduce the space based on that. So in the video description there's a tech note, why is my Guardium appliance filling up? That goes into much more detail about some of the common top tables, what is the cause of that table becoming large, and what actions can you do, for example changing the policy to reduce the space of those tables. So this is probably one of the most important troubleshooting tools you can have if your database is filling up, because it can tell you why it's filling up. So the next thing to check, coming back to the GUI, is the aggregation archive log. If you go to reports, Guardium operational reports, aggregation archive log. In version 10 you just see the high level processes here, but we can right click on the archive, you look at the detail log, so you can see a little bit more detail, and you can see for example that in this case there's 0 days to purge, but everything here has succeeded. So what you want to do is just look through the aggregation archive log and in the details in version 10 and see if there's any failures, see if there's any errors. So that might lead you to conclude that the purge is not working, which could be a cause for the appliance database filling up. In version 9 all this information is just in the single aggregation archive log report, you don't have to right click on anything. In version 10 as well there's this fail log, so if you see that the status has failed, clicking on the fail log might help you understand why that is. There's a tech note in the video description that can help you to troubleshoot aggregation archive errors, to go into more detail to try and resolve the problem if you can tell that the purge is failing and that's probably why the appliance is filling up. Another very useful thing you can do to troubleshoot is use reports to check how the data is spread out between different tables and across time. So for example we're looking here at a report called sessions per day. If we look at the query definition, it's just a count of the sessions per day. And now if we go back at it, what we can see here is on these different days there's a certain number of sessions, and we can look back and say, okay, that we know the purge days on this appliance is 10 days, and we can see here there's only data going back 7 days, so we know that there's no data older than the purge setting on this appliance. So that tells us that the purge is working. Now if you saw in this report lots of data going back, lots of sessions much older than the purge days, that will tell you that the purge isn't working, and even if there weren't any errors in the aggregation archive log, you still might see some old data here, and that would alert you to the fact that the purge is not working despite there being no errors. If we remember back to the allow purge without archiving or exporting option, that's a common reason that there's data older than the purge period but there's actually no error on the purge. So this report is very useful to show you, is there data older than my purge period on the appliance. Now if you go back to your top tables list and you can see which of your tables are the biggest, you can also make reports specific to those top tables. For example, I've made a report here, policy violations per day. If we look at the query definition, similar to the other ones, in the policy rule violation main entity, policy violations domain, and it's just a count of the policy violations per day. And similar to the last one, you can see how many violations are coming per day. If we say that policy violations are top table, this is showing us what day the biggest contribution to our top table has come in. And you might see something like what we have here on the 4th of April. There's a much bigger spike in policy violations compared to the other days. And that can tell you a couple of things. Firstly, there might be something you need to investigate there. Why was the number of policy violations so high? And secondly, it's telling you that even if you purge off these first 3 days, you're not going to get as much space back as if you purge off this day. So if you need to lower your purge period, it's useful to know how the data is spread out across your biggest tables, and therefore if it's going to have a significant effect to lower the purge period. So you can make any number of reports like this depending on what your top tables are, and between these ones and the session one you can understand, is there data older than my purge period on the appliance? And how is the data spread out in my top tables? And that can really help you take actions moving forward. From those brief troubleshooting steps, you should be able to answer a few questions. How full is the database? What are the top tables? How is the data in the largest tables spread out by day? Is there much data older than the purge period in the database? And are there any purge or aggregation errors? And you can use the answers to those questions to help you choose the correct action to lower the space if you need to. And that's what we're going to move on to now, the actions you can take in different situations. First situation we're going to talk about is if you have no aggregation errors and almost no data or no data older than the purge period when you look in your reports. And what that's telling you really is that the GUI purge is working. In this case, what you can do is the general approach you have if the purge is working is to just let the purge work but just reduce the purge period. So by small increments, so by 5 or 10 days, reduce the purge period and then purge once now. Now you can see the tech note, what can I do if I see my Guardium appliance getting full? That goes into a bit more detail of that. So if it's possible for you to reduce the purge period and the purge is already working, that's the best thing you can do. The other thing you can do is, depending on what your top tables are, you can take action. Again, if you look at that tech note, why is my Guardium internal database filling up? This goes into much more detail. But like in this example, if we had policy violations log as one of the top tables, you could investigate why there's so many alerts coming in and possibly amend the policy to reduce those in the future. So less data is going to be coming into the appliance. If you can't change the policy and you can't reduce the number of days on the appliance, one thing you can try is moving S-taps to different collectors. So if you have a lot of S-taps on this one collector that's getting full, you might want to move one of them over to a different collector, and that can balance the load out better in your environment. And the other thing you can do is, if you just have one S-tap and it's still filling up the appliance, you might want to balance that S-tap using S-tap load balancing across 2 different collectors or more than 2 different collectors. Or in version 10 you might want to use enterprise load balancing, so that can dynamically load balance all your S-taps in your environment and assign them to the correct collectors. There's a number of other load balancing options as well, especially in version 10, but I won't discuss those further. And the final thing you can do, linked into the previous 2 really, is if you can't find another collector that you already have that's not also quite full, if you can't load balance without filling up another appliance as well, you'll have to use more collectors. So this is really the last option. If you can't reduce your purge period, you can't change your policy, you don't have any other collectors that have space to take more data, then really your last option, if the purge is already working, is to add another collector to your environment. The next case that we're going to talk about is if you have aggregation errors, purge errors, or if you have a significant amount of data older than the purge period, or if you have both of those together. What that means is the GUI purge is not working. In cases like this, what you can do is, if the purge is not working on schedule, you can try running it once now. A lot of aggregation problems can be caused by schedule conflicts, so if you try running it once now at a time when nothing else is running and it works, then you probably need to go back and look at your schedule. Again, you can go back and check that setting, allow purge without exporting or archiving. If there's no aggregation errors, that could be the cause of data existing on the appliance that's older than the purge period. You can use this tech note, how to troubleshoot Guardium aggregation or archive errors. That'll be in the video description. And with aggregation errors, or if the purge is failing, if you've been through the troubleshooting steps and it's still not working, you can open a PMR and Guardium support will help you troubleshoot the problem and resolve it. And finally, if you ever have a problem where the purge is not working or you're having aggregation errors, and eventually it does get resolved, It's really important that you install the latest GPU patch. As I said before, we're making a lot of fixes in these patches, and it's best to be up to the latest version. Especially if you're on version 9 and you haven't gone to version 9.5, I'd recommend to go there because there's a lot of improvements for the purge performance. The final case, the GUI purge is not working, same as before, and the database is 90% full, or it's going to get to 90% full very soon. In this case, like before, the GUI purge is not working, but it's a much more pressing situation. So in this case, you've got to make sure that the inspection core is definitely stopped. So you can use the CLI command stop inspection core. If you have the correct setting that auto stops services, that should happen always, but if the DB is full, make sure to double check, and especially make sure not to restart the inspection core when the database is already full. The other thing to do is make sure that no one is running audit processes on this appliance, because that will fill up the internal database even if the inspection core is off. Once you've made sure of that, then you can go back to point 2 on the last slide and go through all the troubleshooting steps again, because all the same things will apply there, in case you can take some steps to resolve the issue yourself. And in the case when the database is 90% full, if you need to open a PMR, it might meet the conditions for a Severity 1 PMR if it's a production appliance. So please have a look at that tech note. What type of Guardium problem can I consider to be a Severity 1 PMR? So we've been through a lot in this video. I'm just going to do a quick summary so we remember all the points we've been through. Firstly, what you can check right now to prevent problems in the future. Appliances have to have a supported disk size. Make sure your purge period isn't too big. Make sure your appliances are on the latest GPU. Make sure your appliances are set to stop the services when the database is 90% full. Make sure you've investigated your policy and it's defined in a way that's going to minimize unnecessary logging. And last but possibly most importantly, make sure you've configured an alert to notify you when the database is getting full. How to troubleshoot when the database is getting full. Check the percent used of the database. Check the top tables and use that tech note to understand what they mean. Check the aggregation archive log for errors. And check in reports, for example the sessions per day report, policy violations per day, to see how the data in your top tables is spread across time and to see if there's data older than the purge period. And the actions you can take when the database is getting full. You can identify which of the 3 situations that you're in. Either the GUI purge is working, the GUI purge is not working, or the GUI purge is not working and the database is 90% full, and understand the different options you have in those 3 different cases. So that's all for this video. Thank you very much. I hope if you go through all these points, you're going to have a much healthier and well administered system in the future.